what marriage actually was. Florence, the late 15th century. A young man of good family falls hopelessly in love. He defies his father, ignores his advisors, and marries the woman who makes his heart race. Everyone around him calls it courageous. Within a few short years, the marriage has hollowed out his finances, severed alliances his family spent generations building, and left him politically exposed in a city where exposure meant ruin. He did not die of love. He died of the consequences of mistaking love for a foundation. Niccolo Machiavelli lived among men like this. He studied them, served them, watched them rise and fall, and recorded the patterns with the cold patience of a man who cared more about what was true than about what was flattering. And the pattern he found around marriage is one our entire culture now refuses to hear, that choosing a spouse on the basis of romantic feeling is one of the most reckless decisions a human being can make. This is not the bitterness of a man who never loved. Machiavelli married, raised children, and wrote with unusual honesty about the distance between what the heart wants and what reality rewards. His point was never that affection is worthless. It was that affection is a luxury, not a load-bearing wall. Build a permanent structure on it and the whole thing comes down the moment the feeling shifts, and the feeling always shifts. What we're going to do in this video is take Machiavelli's actual observations about marriage as an institution of power, money, and alliance, and hold them up against the modern fantasy of marriage as the happy ending of a love story. We're going to look at why the old, unromantic model produced unions that were more stable, more prosperous, and frequently more contented than the romance-first model we treat as obviously superior. And we're going to be honest about something almost nobody will say out loud, that marrying for love may be the single most expensive error you ever make, and the bill arrives in money, in time, in freedom, and in the years of your life you don't get back. To understand why Machiavelli was so unsentimental, you have to strip away the costume drama version of history and look at what marriage actually did for the overwhelming majority of people who ever lived. For most of human history, marriage was not the union of two hearts. It was the merging of two enterprises. A marriage joined households, combined capital, secured trade routes, sealed peace between rival families, and produced heirs who would carry the whole arrangement forward. Whether the bride and groom felt butterflies was, frankly, a minor detail. Pleasant if it happened. Irrelevant if it didn't. A merchant married his daughter to a partner's son not because the two were besotted but because the union locked in a supply chain, pooled liquidity, and converted a business relationship into something blood could enforce. A lord married to bind an alliance, absorb an estate, or buy a powerful family's loyalty without spending a coin. A craftsman married to gain a workshop, a clientele, a second pair of hands, and someone to keep the house standing while he worked. Every one of these was a calculated move, weighed with the same seriousness as any large investment, because that's what it was. We look back on this and recoil, because we read it through the lens of a culture that has been marinating in romantic ideology for 2 centuries. But these people were not stupid, and they were not crueler than us. They had simply watched, across many generations, what actually made marriages survive and what made them rot. And what made them survive, again and again, was aligned interest, shared purpose, and the support of families with skin in the game. What made them collapse was exactly the thing we now worship, a blaze of passion that flares hot, burns through its fuel, and leaves two strangers staring at each other across the ashes. Here is the part our era cannot accept. Those strategic marriages frequently grew into deep affection. two people who built a business, raised children, and weathered hardships side by side often ended up bound by something far sturdier than infatuation, a loyalty forged in shared labor. Meanwhile, the love matches, the ones that started at fever pitch, tended to curdle into resentment the instant the chemistry normalized and the incompatibilities underneath came into focus. The couple who couldn't live without each other discovered, 3 years in, that they could barely live with each other, and now they were legally chained to the discovery. The old system was not flawless. Families could be selfish, and some matches were genuinely miserable. But it carried 4 quiet advantages that our model has thrown away. First, the expectations were honest. Nobody walked in expecting eternal fireworks, so nobody felt cheated when the fireworks faded. Second, the support was real. 2 allied families both had reasons to keep the marriage intact. Third, the criteria were comprehensive: money, goals, temperament, reputation, values, and the brute logistics of building a shared life. Fourth, the marriage had a purpose beyond itself, and paradoxically that often made the couple happier than those who demand that one person be their entire universe. Why the feeling is the wrong foundation now to the uncomfortable core of it. Why is romantic love such a disastrous thing to build a life on? Because of what romantic love actually is, something our culture works very hard to never look at directly. Romantic love is temporary. Not occasionally temporary. Not temporary unless you're lucky. Always temporary. The dizzying, obsessive, can't eat, can't sleep state of falling in love is a specific neurochemical event, and the human brain is physically incapable of sustaining it. It runs, in most people, somewhere between several months and a couple of years before it settles. That intoxication is a chemical cocktail engineered by evolution to make you bond and reproduce. It was never built to last, because a brain permanently locked in that state couldn't function, couldn't work, couldn't plan, couldn't survive. So when you marry for love, look closely at what you've actually done. You've signed a permanent legal and financial contract on the strength of a temporary chemical high. You've bet your entire future on a feeling that is guaranteed to change. It is the equivalent of signing a 30-year mortgage because the house looked beautiful in one particular sunset, without ever checking the foundation, the wiring, or whether you can make the payments. And it's worse than merely temporary, because that same chemistry actively sabotages your judgment. The infatuation state dampens the brain's machinery for critical evaluation. While you are falling in love, you literally cannot think clearly about the person you're falling in love with. The very emotion our culture tells you should decide whether to marry is the emotion that cripples your ability to decide wisely. This is why people drowning in love sail straight past enormous red flags. It's why they wave off the worried friend, the uneasy parent, the obvious mismatch in values. When the feeling goes, people misread it. They decide they chose wrong, that this must not have been the one, and they go chasing the high again with someone new. Most people run this loop 2 or 3 times before they either give up or finally understand that the high always fades, and chasing it just restarts the same machine. The fading was never a sign of error. It was biology doing exactly what biology does. The tragedy is only that they built the entire house on the one thing that was certain to evaporate. Strategic unions sidestep this whole trap by never depending on the high in the first place. When 2 genuinely compatible people commit, the fading of infatuation changes nothing structural, because the structure was never the infatuation. If romance grows, wonderful. If it merely simmers, the partnership still works, because it was built to do work. This is precisely why thoughtfully arranged marriages, the kind where the individuals have real input, so often report higher long-term satisfaction than love matches. Not because those couples feel more passion, but because they never staked everything on passion, and so they were never betrayed by its absence. Now, a lot of this comes down to reading people accurately before you're entangled, seeing past the performance, recognizing what someone actually values, understanding the psychology driving the person across the table from you, especially in the early phases when everyone is hiding their flaws. If you want the deeper breakdown of how attraction, power, and feminine psychology actually operate beneath the surface, the things that let you see clearly while everyone else is blinded by feeling, subscribe to the channel. That's the entire reason this place exists, to make you the one person in the room who isn't being played. The financial wreckage. Let's leave philosophy and talk about money, because this is where the romantic fantasy does its most measurable damage. When you marry for love, money is an afterthought, if it's a thought at all. You're in love. Money feels grubby and small next to what you're feeling. You'll figure it out. Love conquers everything. And then love meets the spreadsheet. Clashing money styles are among the leading causes of marital conflict and divorce on the planet. One of you saves on instinct, the other spends on impulse. One is allergic to risk, the other treats the future like a casino. One needs the deep security of a cushion, the other needs experiences and can't understand why anyone hoards. While you're dating with separate accounts, none of this matters. The moment your finances legally fuse, it becomes a slow-motion catastrophe. The spender quietly dismantles the saver's hard-won security. The gambler bleeds the joint account dry. And every one of these collisions breeds a resentment that eats the romance alive. Then there's the career problem nobody runs the numbers on. Marry for love without checking whether two lives can actually coexist, and one day a brilliant opportunity appears, in another city, another country, another orbit entirely. One career soars, the other is asked to die quietly so the marriage can survive. The romantic script promises that love finds a way. The math says somebody's ambitions get buried, and the funeral poisons everything that follows. And then there is divorce, which claims roughly half of love marriages. The couple who married on pure feeling almost never signed a prenuptial agreement, because asking for one felt like an insult to the romance. So when it ends, the destruction is total. Assets you built before the marriage get carved up. Retirement accounts split. The home sold from under you. Lawyers paid in sums that could have built real wealth. Support payments stretching years into the future. A single divorce can erase a decade of progress, and people who married on feeling tend to do it more than once, restarting the wreckage every time. Beyond the dramatic disasters, there's the quiet, daily financial bleed of emotion-driven decisions. You buy the house you can't afford because your spouse fell in love with it. You take on debt to maintain a lifestyle that's slowly strangling you. You make career choices to soothe your partner instead of building your future. None of these feel catastrophic in the moment. Compound them across 20 years and the total is staggering. There's a generational dimension too. The old strategic marriages combined family wealth and handed something larger to the next generation. Love marriages routinely fuse two incompatible relationships with money, build less, and leave their children less, often nothing but the diminished remains of a divorce, split two ways. Machiavelli noticed that the princes who married for love generally died poorer than they'd started, while the ones who married with calculation tended to multiply what they had. 5 centuries later, the pattern holds with depressing precision. Money can't buy a happy marriage, but the lack of it can almost guarantee a miserable one. 1,000 small incompatibilities, the financial collapse is dramatic. But most love marriages don't die in a single explosion. They die by 1,000 small cuts, each one too minor to mention and too constant to survive. When you pick a partner on chemistry alone, you're rolling the dice that the person who thrills you will also happen to be the person you can live with, across the dozens of unglamorous dimensions that actually decide whether 2 lives fit. Sometimes the dice land well. Usually they don't. Consider the texture of daily life. One of you needs order, the other lives happily in chaos. One needs a quiet home, the other needs constant stimulation. One rises with the sun, the other comes alive at midnight. None of it registers while you're dating, because dating is a highlight reel. All of it becomes sandpaper once you share a roof. Multiply that friction across years and you get 2 people who once burned for each other and now flinch at the sound of each other's keys in the door, not because anyone is a villain, but because they were never actually compatible, and the chemistry hit it just long enough to trap them. Values cut deeper still. Marry someone whose core values clash with yours, because in the haze, values felt less urgent than feelings, and every major decision becomes a battlefield. One of you lives for career, the other for balance. One needs security, the other needs adventure. One wants to raise children inside of faith, the other wants them free to choose. These aren't disputes with a tidy middle. Someone has to betray something they hold sacred, and the betrayal metastasizes into contempt, or the couple simply wages the same war on repeat for the rest of their lives. Then there's how you fight. One of you is direct and needs honesty even when it stings. The other avoids conflict and prizes peace over truth. One processes pain in silence and needs space. The other needs to talk it out now. One pursues, the other withdraws, and the chase escalates into a war that was never really about the original argument at all. Social and intellectual mismatches finish the job. The extrovert feels caged, the introvert feels exhausted, and the slow killer nobody takes seriously beforehand. 2 people who simply have nothing to say to each other once the novelty wears off. None of these people are bad. They are mismatched, and romance kept the mismatch invisible exactly long enough to make it permanent. Strategic marriages weren't perfect, but they screened out the obvious, predictable collisions in advance, and that screening, unglamorous as it sounds, outperformed passion across every decade that followed. The modern strategic method. So what does Machiavelli's logic look like for someone living now? We can't and shouldn't resurrect the literal arranged marriage, but we can absolutely steal its underlying intelligence and apply it to our own choices. The method begins by treating marriage as what it genuinely is, a binding legal and economic partnership with deep social consequences, in which compatibility across many dimensions matters infinitely more than the intensity of early feeling. This doesn't banish love. It demotes love from justification to bonus, the welcome final ingredient rather than the entire recipe. Start with money, and make it non-negotiable. Before marriage is even on the table, you need brutal clarity on the financial questions. What are each of you actually trying to build, and on what timeline? How does each of you earn, spend, save, and risk? Have these conversations early, explicitly, and in detail. If you uncover a fundamental mismatch, that ends the relationship, not because money matters more than love, but because the money will eventually kill the love anyway, just after it's legally too late to escape cheaply. Then test your visions of the future. Where does each of you want to be in 5, 10, 20 years? Children, how many, or none? City or countryside? Build a business or build security? The romantic creed insists love will reconcile any difference. The strategic truth is that compromise on a fundamental life goal just means two people permanently dissatisfied. Far better to find someone already pointed the same direction than to ask someone to amputate their dreams to fit yours. Examine values honestly, not the surface agreement, but the deep frameworks beneath. Pressure test daily life with real, unglamorous time together, not curated date nights. Check whether you're actually interesting to each other once the physical pull is stripped away. And watch how you handle conflict before you commit to a lifetime of it. Couples who can't navigate conflict before marriage do not magically acquire the skill afterward. Only after all of that, financial fit, aligned futures, compatible values, livable daily life, real conversation, fair conflict, does romantic feeling earn a seat at the table. And then it asks one clean question: do I also feel drawn to this deeply compatible person? If yes, you've found someone genuinely worth marrying. If no, you've found a wonderful friend. That ordering, compatibility first, feeling last, is the entire reversal Machiavelli would demand. And the marriage it produces survives the inevitable cooling of passion, because passion was never the thing holding it up. The prenuptial necessity one application deserves to be named without flinching: the prenuptial agreement. Nothing separates the person who understands marriage as a contract from the person still lost in the fairy tale quite like their reaction to this word. The romantic objection runs that planning for divorce proves you don't believe in the marriage, that real love needs no insurance. This objection is a confession of strategic naivety. Marriage is a contract, with default terms already written for you about property, support, and obligation if it ends. Marry without a prenup and you are silently accepting whatever terms your jurisdiction happens to impose, unread and unnegotiated, and the leverage exists in exactly one window, before the wedding, while your partner wants the marriage and is willing to negotiate to get it. After the vows, that leverage is gone forever. The benefits run deeper than protection, though. The process of negotiating a prenup forces the precise conversations every couple should have anyway, about money, assets, expectations, fairness. A couple who can navigate that honestly and reach an agreement both consider fair has just demonstrated the exact compatibility that predicts a lasting marriage. Refusing a prenup outright means a partner is either financially naive or quietly counting on the default terms working in their favor, and neither is someone you marry without protection.